Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs will come to order. Thank you all for joining us, the witnesses, all of you in the audience and members of this committee. The fentanyl crisis is one of the gravest threats facing all of our communities. Every year, 5,000 Ohioans, one state alone, 5,000 Ohioans die from unintentional drug overdoses. In 2022, a staggering 110,000 Americans lost their lives as a result of unintentional overdose. A moment ago, Mr. DeFord said in the hall that it's the equivalent of a 747, I believe you said, going down every day. Imagine each year losing a city nearly the size of Dayton, Ohio, or North Charleston, South Carolina, or Billings, Montana, or Wilmington, North Carolina. Behind all those numbers, most tragically, are stories of families torn apart, of parents losing teenagers before they graduate high school, of grandparents stepping in to raise grandchildren. No matter where you come from, pretty much everyone has a fentanyl story. It may be your own family, it may be a neighbor, it may be a coworker. We've all lost someone or know someone who's lost someone. It's a crisis that cuts across all geographic lines. It's certainly across all partisan divides. It's why it has been and will continue to be a top priority of this committee. I thank Mr. Scott for his work on that. We've taken bipartisan action. We'll continue to. With Ranking Member Scott and the entire committee, and now 67 co-sponsors, we worked in a bipartisan way to design a new sanctions program, the Fentanyl Act, that can help reduce the flow of fentanyl into our communities. In this committee, our purview, as you all, I think, know, is often money. We use that authority to hit the cartels and chemical suppliers directly where it hurts their bank accounts. The cartels that traffic these drugs are from Mexico are billion-dollar operations. Our bill goes directly, follows the money after those billions. China is the main source of precursor chemicals for illicit fentanyl, supplying the cartels in Mexico, who then traffic the fentanyl into the United States. Chinese entities often help them launder the money for the Mexican cartels. The new Economic Sanctions Authority and money laundering penalties, which will be created by the Fentanyl Act, will go after all of these components of the illicit fentanyl supply chain and will help stop more at its source before it ever reaches our communities. Now, when we talk about sanctions regimes and directing the Treasury Department to block assets, the discussion can get pretty technical and pretty sterile far too quickly. It's why the focus of today's hearings on the human toll that illicit finance takes on our families, on our friends, on our neighbors. Our focus today is why this work matters, why we must finish this job, why we need to get this bill signed into law. We're going to hear from Mr. Jason Jelly Roll DeFord to testify about his personal experience in communities that have been devastated by the addiction crisis. I'm guessing most of you didn't have Jelly Roll testifies at Senate Banking Committee on your 24 bingo card. But few speak and sing as eloquently, as openly, as, shall we say, viscerally about addiction as Mr. DeFord. There's a reason why Americans flock to his music and his concerts. He has a connection with people based on shared pain, shared challenges, shared hope. Today, we'll also hear from National President of the Fraternal Order of Police, Mr. Patrick Yos, about his members' work in the front line of the response. Mr. Yos, thank you for your work with our office on a whole host of things, from the Helper Act and so much else. Law enforcement officers live this crisis every day in their work. One of the best ways we support them is preventing fentanyl from flowing freely into and through the communities which they serve. Mr. Christopher Urban, a veteran DEA agent, will describe the trail fentanyl and its proceeds take. Thank you for joining us, too. This crisis has many dimensions, including border security and public health and demand reduction and economic stability. Everyone has a role to play, the three of you and so many others. Sadly, no single step is going to make this problem completely disappear. We know that. We aren't or shouldn't be in the business, though, of false promises. What we do is take an all-the-above approach to reduce as much pain and save as many lives as possible. Fentanyl is often mixed with other substances, including cocaine and xylazine. I'm a co-sponsor of the Combating Illicit Xylazine Act, which establishes penalty for manufacturing, distributing, and dispensing xylazine for illicit use. We should also pass my Bipartisan Power Act, which would provide state and local law enforcement with high-tech, portable fentanyl screening devices. I thank President Yo's organization for their support of that legislation. I've also demanded that Treasury hold the governments of China and Mexico accountable for curbing illicit fentanyl trafficking. It's clear that the Mexican and Chinese governments are not doing enough to combat the flow of fentanyl. We need specific benchmarks for combating fentanyl trafficking in the opioid crisis and more information regarding the role of the recently announced Treasury Department counter fentanyl strike force. It's vital we effectively monitor the administration's effort to stop fentanyl at its source. I call my colleagues to use their membership on committees to explore legislation on other committees too, to explore legislation that will help us treat addiction, improve our public health response, stop the trafficking of illicit fentanyl into our communities. A crisis this massive, this multifaceted, demands our sustained focus. It's my pledge as chair of this committee, my pledge to the 12 million people who live in my state. It starts with getting our bill signed into law. Fentanyl, as I said, and I will close with this, passed out of our committee unanimously, written by Senator Scott and me and our staffs principally. I think my colleagues would agree we're a diverse group. There's not a lot, almost nothing this committee finds a complete unanimity on, but we're able to find common ground on an issue vital to all of our states and our country. And our colleagues in the Senate agreed, passing this with overwhelming bipartisan support as part of the Senate, as part of the, through the Senate of the NDAA bill. The House needs to finish the job, needs to get this bill to the president's desk. It's our chance to show the people we serve that we can work together, we can put partisanship aside, we can take action on things that actually matter to their lives. Families, law enforcement, and all our communities are counting on us. Let's get this done. Senator Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for each of you being willing to testify before us today. And thank you, Jelly Roll, for the shout out on the fentanyl legislation last night at your concert. It's so important for Americans to come together around such an important issue, ending the fentanyl crisis that is devastating family after family after family. I think specifically of Alan Shaw in Charleston, South Carolina, a friend of mine who lost his son, Alan Shaw II, to fentanyl. The devastation that has ravished the family is immeasurable. And anything that we can do as a body to make common sense reforms, to hold those accountable, and to stop the cash flow that funds fentanyl is absolutely essential that we get it done right now. And unfortunately, we're here today having another hearing on fentanyl because our friends on the other side of the Capitol, because of the shenanigans at the end of last year, didn't get the bill included in legislation that would have made this, I believe, law already. It is incredibly unfortunate that playing politics is still a game played in Washington, especially on something so important. And I think, as the chairman just said, he and I probably don't agree on very much, most consistently, but I will say, having 22 or 23 of us vote unanimously on this committee, having 6 to 8 of us on the same piece of legislation, and not to have a chance to get it done, it's not just frustrating to those of us on this committee, those of us in Congress, it's incredibly frustrating to the people of our country who watch the devastation eat away at their communities. Congress needs to come together to stop the Mexican cartels, the Chinese chemical suppliers, and the money laundering organizations from profiting off the production and trafficking of fentanyl, resulting in the deaths of tens of thousands of Americans. Put simply, we should all value the health, safety, and security of Americans. When I think about the path of destruction fentanyl has carved across the United States, it's truly jaw-dropping. Preliminary CDC data shows that in 2022, 75,000 Americans lost their lives to fentanyl. In my home state, that's 1,500 South Carolinians in 2022 alone. The national death toll equates to losing the entire city of Wilmington, Delaware, the president's hometown, each year just from overdoses of fentanyl. And for every life lost, our community feels the impact. What impact? It's the mothers, the brothers, the fathers, the children who've lost a loved one and who try to pick up the pieces because we have a southern border that is so wide open, of 48,000 pounds of fentanyl come right through it. Fentanyl's destruction has impacted every single one of us personally. I would say that probably half the room knows someone who knows someone whose lives have been devastated, whose families have been destroyed because of fentanyl. But let's take a step back and look at how we got to this point over the last several years. Under this current administration, America is facing the worst border crisis in our nation's history. And the president's disastrous policies have turned the fentanyl epidemic into a national crisis. The CBP reports that fentanyl seizures have soared over 860% since 2019. Our Border Patrol and DEA are working as hard as they can, seizing record amounts of fentanyl at our ports of entry and across our country. But tragically, for every amount seized, we know even more is trafficked on our streets. That's why we must take a two-pronged approach to addressing the fentanyl crisis. Number one, we must tackle the physical front by securing our border. That's why I've introduced both the Allen T. Schall II Fentanyl Public Health Emergency and Overdose Prevention Act, as well as the Secure the Border Act of 2023. These bills would expedite the processing and removal of migrants illegally entering the country and properly fund and bolster security measures along our southern border. Number two, we must attack the criminal financing of the fentanyl trade by enforcing our money laundering and sanction laws. That's where this banking committee comes into play. My bill, the Fend Off Fentanyl Act, which is bipartisan, is critical to helping stop this illicit financing. I want to once again thank the chairman and all the colleagues on this committee for working together in a bipartisan fashion for the health of this nation. FEN makes combating fentanyl a top national security priority for the United States, and once enacted, will maximize our ability to leverage sanctions and anti-money laundering tools against illicit Mexican and Chinese organizations that traffic deadly fentanyl. Follow the money is a tried and true investigative strategy that must be employed more forcefully to combat fentanyl trafficking in the United States. Cartels and criminals that profit from our devastating losses must be stopped. And to do that, we have to hit them where it hurts, and that's their wallets. The illicit money engine needs to be turned off, and it needs to be turned off now. The Fend Off Fentanyl Act makes clear what we all know too well. The fentanyl crisis facing America is a national emergency and must be treated as a national health emergency. Americans cannot afford us to wait. I am grateful we have a panel here today that is willing to share their perspectives, their personal stories, and support for our legislation. I look forward to hearing from each witness on this critically important topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Scott. I'll introduce today's witnesses. Again, thanks for the three of you for joining us. Mr. Jason Jelly Roll DeFord is a two-time Grammy nominee and CMT Music Awards winner. He sings about and advocates for those facing drug addiction. He consistently speaks directly with and for people struggling with addiction across the nation. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for serving your nation. Mr. Patrick Yose is the National President for Fraternal Order of Police. President Yose, through his local law enforcement career, has held pivotal law enforcement leadership roles at the state, local, and national levels, and thank you for serving communities in our nation. Mr. Yose. President Yose and Mr. Christopher Urban is currently Managing Director at Nardello & Company. Before that, he was a special agent in charge at DEA. He's a recognized expert on counter threat finance and anti-money laundering investigations. Thank you for your career, long career serving the public. Start with Mr. DeFord. Welcome. For your first committee hearing, I assume.
Forgive me, I'm a little nervous. I'm used to having a rock and roll band behind me when I have a microphone in front of me. During the time that I've been given to share my testimony here, I think it's important to note before I start that in these 5 minutes I'll be speaking that somebody in the United States will die. of a drug overdose, and it is almost a 72% chance that during those 5 minutes it will be fentanyl related. Having started that way, Chairman Brown, Ranking Member Scott, and esteemed committee members, thank you for having me. I know this is a bit of a curveball, but I like a little baseball myself. My name is Jason D. Ford, but to most I am known as Jelly Roll. It is important to establish earlier that I am a musician and that I have no political alliance. I am neither Democrat nor Republican. In fact, because of my past, my right to vote has been restricted. Thus far, I have never paid attention to a political race in my life. Ironically, I think that makes me the perfect person to speak about this because fentanyl transcends partisanship and ideology, gentlemen and women. This is a totally different problem. And I was speaking outside to the media, and I gave them a statistic that said 190 people a day overdose and die every single day in the United States of America. That is about a 737 plane. That's what about a 737 aircraft can carry. Could you imagine the national media attention it would get if they were reporting that a plane was crashing every single day and killing 190 people? But because it's 190 drug addicts, we don't feel that way. Because America has been known to bully and shame drug addicts instead of dealing and trying to understand what the actual root of the problem is with that. But the sad news is that narrative is changing too, because the statistics say that in all likelihood, almost every person in this room has lost a friend, family member, or colleague to the disease known as addiction. I've attended more funerals than I care to share with y'all. This committee, I could sit here and cry for days about the caskets I've carried of people I loved dearly, deeply, in my soul, good people, not just drug addicts, uncles, friends, cousins, normal people. Some people that just got in a car wreck and started taking a pain pill to manage it. One thing led to the other, and how fast it spirals out of control, I don't think people truly understand. So many people. Equally, I think it's important for me to tell y'all that I'm not here to defend the use of illegal drugs. And I also understand the paradox of my history as a drug dealer standing in front of this committee. But equally, I think that's what makes me perfect to talk about this. I was a part of the problem. I am here now standing as a man that wants to be a part of the solution. I brought my community down. I hurt people. I was the uneducated man in the kitchen playing chemist with drugs I knew absolutely nothing about, just like these drug dealers are doing right now when they're mixing every drug on the market with fentanyl, and they're killing the people we love. I'll be honest with y'all, my desire is to only get older and only do better and be better. I believed when I sold drugs genuinely that selling drugs was a victimless crime. I truly believe that, y'all. My father always told me what doesn't get you in the wash will get you in the rinse. Now I have a 15-year-old daughter whose mother is a drug addict. Every day I get to look in the eyes of a victim in my household of the effects of drugs. Every single day. And every single day I have to wonder if me and my wife, if today will be the day that I have to tell my daughter that her mother became a part of the national statistics. History repeats itself, gentlemen. Even in the 1990s, crack cocaine had long made its way into my middle lower class neighborhood. And at that moment, even as a teenager, you could have never convinced me in that moment that there would be a far bigger problem on the horizon in the form of a pharmaceutical drug. And then I watched opioids and Oxycontin burst onto the scene. I'm here to tell y'all that fentanyl is going to make the Sackler family look like saints. And I want to let y'all sit with that for a second. It is time for us to be proactive and not reactive. We were reactive with crack. We were reactive with opioids. And y'all are taking the first step at somebody in Senate finally being proactive. I truly believe in my heart that this bill will stop the supply and can help stop the supply of fentanyl. But in part of being proactive, gentlemen and women and ladies, I have to be frank and tell y'all that if we don't talk to the other side of Capitol Hill and stop the demand, we are going to spin our tires in the mud. Y'all are taking the first step, but I encourage you to take it outside of this room and you take it to your colleagues and your constituents and you give them the most that you can. I know I've got a few seconds here, and Senator Brown said I may or may not go over. All I want to say is that I not only encourage y'all to do this, I encourage y'all to take it a step further. At every concert I perform, I witnessed the heartbreaking impact of fentanyl. I see fans grappling with this tragedy in the form of music that they seek solace in music and hope that their experiences won't befall others. They crave reassurance. These are the people I'm here to speak for, y'all. These people crave reassurance that their elected officials actually care more about human life than they do about ideology and partisanship. I stand here as a regular member of society. I am a stupid songwriter, y'all, but I have firsthand witnessed this in a way most people have not. I encourage y'all to not only pass this bill, but I encourage you to bring it up where it matters, at the kitchen table. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. D. Ford. President Yost, welcome.
Thank you, and good morning, Chairman Brown, Ranking Member Scott, and distinguished members of this committee. I want to thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to provide a law enforcement perspective on how we can step up our efforts in the fentanyl epidemic that is killing Americans at an alarming rate. In 2021, more than 100,000 Americans died from drug overdoses, 65% of which have been attributed to fentanyl. According to the National Institute of Drug Abuse, overdose death rates exploded between 2015 and 2021 by nearly 750%. Fentanyl and fentanyl analogs were found to be the main driver in drug overdoses. The U.S. Drug overdose death toll in 2022 is estimated to be, was estimated to be at 110,000, primarily from synthetic opioids like fentanyl, making them the leading cause of death of Americans aged 18 to 49. Drug cartels use precursor chemicals sourced by China to manufacture pills that are intentionally made to look like prescription medications like OxyContin, Percocet, and Xanax. The Drug Enforcement Administration estimates that of these fake pills, 40 to 60% of them are often bought on social media and are laced with a deadly dose of fentanyl. Taking just one of these can be lethal. Overdose deaths continue to rise despite joint efforts by DEA and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, both of which have partnered with state and local law enforcement agencies to prevent fentanyl and similar opioids from getting into our communities. The DEA alone estimates that it sees more than 379,000 potentially deadly doses of fentanyl and fentanyl analogs, yet the death toll continues to rise. As law enforcement officers, my members are on the front line, and they know firsthand just how devastating this drug epidemic is in our communities. We are typically the first to respond to a 911 call about a potential overdose. Our role goes beyond just interdiction and enforcement. We help preserve the sanctity of life. Many, but not enough, officers have access to Narcan, a life-saving medication that can reverse the opioid overdose if given in time. Law enforcement officers and other emergency medical responders likely save hundreds, if not thousands, of lives across this country every single day. Sadly, law enforcement officers experience every facet of this devastating drug. We work to stem the flow of fentanyl into our communities, to capture and punish those who deal the drugs, to save the lives of those who overdose, and when tragedy strikes, we deliver the news to the families of their loved one that was killed by this poison. We recognize the nature of the threat that our country is facing. We must do more if we are going to end or mitigate the deadly impact of fentanyl and fentanyl analogs to our citizens. We need a fully comprehensive national strategy to reduce overdose, disrupt traffic operations, attack traffickers and cartels with sanctions, and prioritize anti-money laundering efforts related to the illicit opioid trade. The Fraternal Order Police was proud to work with Ranking Member Scott and Chairman Brown to develop Senate Bill 1271, and could not emphasize enough the need to get this legislation moved. It has a bipartisan support, and so it should on both sides of the House, and approved this committee last summer, and it should be passed by the Senate as quickly as possible. The Fentanyl Act will direct resources of the U.S. government to target the fentanyl supply chain from the chemical suppliers in China to the cartels in Mexico smuggling into the United States by requiring the president to impose and enforce sanctions on criminal actors and organizations, increasing the likelihood that those who defy the law will be caught and prosecuted. We also support the use of lawfully forfeited assets of these traffickers to further law enforcement efforts to combat these criminals. The bill authorizes the Treasury Department to use special measures to combat money laundering operations related to the trafficking of fentanyl and similar opioids. This will reduce the profitability of drug trade and bring those profiting from the deaths of American citizens to justice. All of these measures and tools in Senate Bill 1271 will reduce the number of Americans who suffer and die from fentanyl and fentanyl analogs and other deadly illicit opioids. And that should be our #1 goal. We can and must reduce the loss of life by vigorous interdiction and interdiction of the drug supply chain, relentless pursuit of dealers and cartels and suppliers, greater availability of Narcan for law enforcement officers and responders, as well as passing the Fend-Off Act. We need all of these tools in our toolbox to handle this deadly epidemic. And if I could change the subject briefly, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for your leadership in Senate 1514, the Helpers Act, which would create a home loan benefit program for first responders and educators based on the United States Department of Veterans Affairs home loan program available to veterans of our nation. It is important to our members to address the recruiting challenges that law enforcement is facing, and I'd be remiss if I didn't take an opportunity to mention that here. I want to thank all of you for the opportunity to be here today and share the perspective of the 373,000 members of the Fraternal Order of Police on this issue, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you may have.